Hello, it's National Dog Day, so here is the story of how Dog stole fire. In ancient times, when humanity was still very young, the world was a cold, dark and dangerous place, and humanity in that day and age was ill-equipped to deal with it. Dog used to sit upon the hillsides and look down into the valleys where humanity lived, and saw us wandering naked in the snows, shivering and cold and half frozen. And Dog would think to itself, these poor things, these poor creatures, they don't even have fur to cover their bodies and keep them warm. And then Dog would watch us trying to hunt down meat and food, and making such a pig's ear of the event that most of the prey we chased after escaped, except for the occasional thing that died of old age and exhaustion, and that we pounced upon. And it would think to itself, these poor, silly creatures, they can't even hunt properly. And on those rare occasions we actually did catch something, Dog would watch us with our tiny little fingernails and our stunted teeth, nibbling and gnawing at the frozen, dead flesh of these animals. And Dog would think to us, the poor things, they don't even have proper teeth, they don't even have proper claws with which to rend meat and gulp it down. And Dog did its best to teach us how to hunt, to help us to keep warm by sharing its own fur, its own body heat with us, by snuggling up to us at night. And sometimes we were grateful and sometimes we were not, but Dog persisted in its attempts to help us, poor silly things that we were in that day and age. But the weather grew worse and worse and worse, and Dog knew that it was only a matter of time before humanity just froze to death, if not starved to death. And it resolved to do something to help us on a more permanent basis. And Dog thought and thought and thought about the best way to go about helping humanity. And at length it decided the only real thing to do was to go and talk to the ancient ones, the things that lived in the cave at the very top of the great mountain. Beings who had been there since, well, before the dawn of recorded history. And so Dog went on that long, arduous journey up the mountainside, through snows, through blizzards, through wind, through hail. But eventually, day after day after day after day of walking up the mountainside, finally Dog arrived. And all of the time Dog worried about what poor silly humanity was getting up to down in the valleys without his assistance to help us. But finally Dog came to the cave of the Ancient Ones, and there Dog peered inside the cave and saw the Ancient Ones huddled around some bright, blazing, burning, hot thing in the very centre of the cave. And Dog crept in and made obeisance to the Ancient Ones and said to them, down in the valley is this poor, silly humanity, this poor misguided creature, this naked, nearly toothless, nearly clawless, abysmal hunting thing that is struggling to survive. It needs warmth, it needs light to see in the dark, for its eyesight is as bad as its pelt. How it lives I do not know, but it needs something. It needs that thing you have there in the centre of the cave that gives you light, that gives you heat, that you all huddle around. And the Ancient Ones thought about this briefly and said, no, we will not share fire with anyone. This is our fire, and thus it must remain. No one can have fire except us. And they banished Dog from the cave and threw sticks at Dog, and Dog went out. But outside the cave, Dog sat thinking, that which is not freely given must nonetheless be shared. And so Dog waited until it got very, very, very dark, and the stars were out and the moon was high, and it could hear snoring from within the cave of the Ancient Ones, and Dog snuck back into the cave of the Ancient Ones, and there plucked a single branch from the fire, leaving the rest of the fire for the Ancient Ones, just taking one branch, its end burning. and crept out of the cave. But just as Dog was leaving the cave, the end of the branch banged against the side of the cave wall and startled the Ancient Ones awake, and they saw what Dog was up to. They saw what was happening, and they called after Dog, demanding it come back and insisting, but Dog ran and ran and ran, and the Ancient Ones, their bones creaking and aching with movement, for they had not moved properly in centuries, thundered after Dog. They galloped after him down the mountainside, and Dog ran faster and faster and faster on all four legs, and the Ancient Ones came clawing, their bones creaking like the branches of trees, their voices harsh and hoarse from lack of use, bellowing and demanding their fire back. And as Dog ran down the mountainside, the branch grew brighter and brighter and brighter, and the icicles upon the trees of the mountain began to drip for the first time in living memory. But the fire also began to burn into the stick, getting down further and further and further into the wood. And still the Ancient Ones were running after Dog and thundering and roaring and demanding their fire back. And still Dog was running faster and faster and faster, until finally, by the light of the moon, Dog could see in the valley those poor silly human beings huddled under the naked trees for what very little shelter they could find from the icy winds. And the Ancient Ones were getting faster and faster and faster and gaining upon Dog, and Dog ran and ran and ran and ran, the fire, the heat burning closer and closer and closer to the Dog's face, starting to singe Dog's fur, and Dog could smell himself burning, and he ran 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 till his lungs were nearly exploding with the exhaustion of it, and finally he reached the biggest tree where humanity was huddled in greatest number, and there, amongst the dead fallen branches from this ancient tree, Dog dropped what was left of the branch stolen from the Ancient One's fire, and it caught amidst the branches of the tree. And the fire began to spread, and humanity, panicked, terrified at the sight of this strange alien thing, backed off, shrieking and gibbering and pointing and howling. And the Ancient Ones finally arrived amidst the silliness and the chaos of humanity, and they saw the fire spreading, and they realised that it was beyond their power to get the fire back. And they returned up the mountainside, cursing and snarling and muttering, imprecating against poor Dog. And all of the while, as they went up and up the mountain, their feet sank into the snow, but the snow became shallower and shallower and shallower as it melted, as spring spread throughout the land, as the icicles dripped and the snow dissolved, until finally, as they reached the top of the mountain, the Ancient Ones were treading on grass, and they retired to their cave, knowing that winter was over. Down in the valley, as spring spread, the land warmed up, the trees and the plants began to come into leaf and provide more shelter, and Dog was able to guide humanity in how to use fire, how to kindle their own fire. But Dog, for all of his service to humanity in rescuing the fire, had paid the price. For in burning down and down and down, that branch had not simply seared his fur, but had burnt his tongue as he held the branch in his mouth, and Dog lost the power of speech. And so from that day to this, dogs have been able to do nothing but growl and snarl and woof and grunt, no longer able to speak to humanity in a way that we fully understand. We can half guess what they're on about through their body language, but they understand us far more than we ever understand them. But still, to this very day, language or no language, Dog guides us and guards us and protects us, and looks upon us and shakes his head and thinks what a silly thing we still are. Thank you.